should go back to the beginning.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, so there we go. Yeah. So hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday with the American Anthropological Association. It's a little bit cloudy here, but I'm glad we're here. Today I have with me Sibel Kusimba, who is an anthropologist in residence at the American University. She's been conducting anthropological fieldwork in Kenya since 1993. Her initial research interests were Paleolithic, proto-historic, and recent hunter-gatherers. Her 2003 book, African Foragers, was named an outstanding academic book by the American Library Association. Since living through the mobile phone revolution in Africa, her interests have turned to the social and cultural impact of mobile phone communication, in particular, use of mobile money. For 2 field seasons, she has traced the social networks of mobile money in families and communities, sponsored by the Institute for Money, Technology, and Financial Inclusion at the University of California in Irvine. It is a pleasure to have you here. Some notes before we begin. We are recording this, and the recording will be both on WebEx's archive and on YouTube within the week. And at times during the presentation, you may be called upon to give your feedback, and that can be done by the feedback button at the bottom of the participant panel. It's a little, looks like a comment with a check in it. There's yes, no, too fast, too slow, applaud, and laughter. And you're welcome to use any of those. And without further ado, I turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. I'd like to thank the American Anthropological Association for asking me to do this webinar. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you to all of you out there who are tuning in. I was almost taken out by a hurricane a few minutes ago, so I'm glad that we're still standing. So I'm going to talk today about anthropological research on mobile money systems in Kenya. First, I would like to thank my wonderful supporters at the IMTFI at the University of California at Irvine, and my many collaborators and research associates, and all the great anthropologists out there who have inspired me with their work. Your names are not on here, but thank you anyway, and I'm sure your influence will be apparent in a few minutes. Well, this is a timely webinar because just a few days ago, at the beginning of the month, Apple announced its new iPhone 6, which is the first phone in the United States that will come with a built-in payment system. So it has a chip that works at a tap-to-pay terminal, and if you want to see how that works, you can follow the link at the bottom there. There is a video where they use the phone to pay for groceries at, I think, Whole Foods, which I guess is appropriate there for the iPhone. Opinion has been really mixed about this phone. Neil Irwin was writing in the New York Times, and he said, "Why is Apple solving a problem that doesn't exist? My credit and debit card works fine, and am I really so lazy that I can't take it out of my pocket to pay for my groceries?" But on the other hand, a lot of people think that this new mobile payment system is going to be great, and it's going to revolutionize commerce, and it's going to give consumers all these different and new forms of money that they can use online, such as, loyalty points from different merchants. We'll be able to swap them and trade them and so on. So they think it's going to be this really great thing. So anyway, here's our first poll for the day. If you would really want one of these iPhones with the Apple Pay payment system built in, you can vote yes. If you think your credit or debit is working fine for you as your cash alternative, or if you just like cash, or if you would prefer cowrie shells or Melanesian shell necklaces or shekels or some other kind of money, then you can vote no. So let's do our first poll on the Apple Pay system. All right. I guess I'll just move on while Andrew takes care of the poll there. If you don't have an iPhone and really want one, don't despair, because really none of us here in the United States are early adopters. In fact, the real early adopters are in Kenya, where a mobile money system has been used since 2007, and in fact, it's really, really popular. It's quite a bit different from the Apple Pay system that I just described, but a really large amount of commerce goes through mobile money in Kenya, $20 billion last year alone, which is a very large portion of the Kenyan economy, depending on how you measure it. More than 60% of Kenyans are users of this service, and there are more mobile money accounts than there are adults in Kenya, so it's really popular. You can see the menu on a simple dumb phone there on the upper right-hand slide, and these are all the things you can do with mobile money, and Safaricom's M-Pesa is still the market leader there for now. So number one, you can send money. You can go to an agent or merchant, as you're supposed to call them, give them cash, and then they basically load the money onto your text message account. So you'll see it on there as a text message that you've received this new money. Then you can send it to someone. That person can also go to an agent and then withdraw the cash if they want to. You can also buy airtime, and that is something Kenyans love to do, is send airtime gifts to their friends and relatives. And there you can see the little advertisement on your left. They're advertising the Sambaza service. And Sambaza means to spread. So just like giving your friends a piece of cake or sharing a cake, go ahead and Sambaza the people you love with a little bit of airtime. You can also pay bills. Many merchants have prominently displayed their merchant number, so you can enter their number when you're paying for things. And you can pay utility bills or school fee bills in a very, very similar way. There's also a new microcredit service called M-Shwari, which is the picture in the middle there. You can also link to your bank account, and increasingly more and more people are doing that. In spite of the diversity of all the different things you can do, though, for a lot of people, the sending money service is really the biggest usage of the mobile money systems right now. Especially in rural areas, like in rural Western Kenya where I worked, sending and receiving money from friends and relatives is really most of what people do with mobile money systems. The development economist, Ignacio Mas, has called it, in effect, a better form of cash rather than a replacement of cash. And in other words, the mobile money system allows cash to move around. The mobile money merchants take the place of the missing bank account infrastructure that people don't have. So it's really more about providing people with access to cash than it is about creating a cash-light economy or replacing cash with another form of currency or of money. All of that, I think, might be ready to change soon, because just recently Equity Bank looks like they got the green light to provide this new thin SIM technology. So you'll be able to keep your telecommunications provider but still have this Equity Bank thin SIM in your phone that will allow you to communicate directly with your Equity Bank account. Equity Bank is one of the largest banks in terms of the number of consumers. And so they might be ready to take this thing over. And, you know, what's been interesting in Kenya is the conflict between the telecommunications providers and the financial services providers in terms of who's going to control mobile money. But if the Equity Bank communication with your bank provision really gets going, that could really mean that this will all change, and it will look much more like a true financial inclusion model. Financial inclusion being the development goal of bringing financial services to people who don't have access to banks, to credit, and so on. Financial inclusion has become the most significant development initiative right now. It may take up more NGO dollars than any other initiative, including health, according to some observers. That might change, I suppose, with the Ebola virus. But for now, the financial inclusion viewpoint is really what dominates the scholarship on mobile money. And I think that's an interesting situation to be in as an anthropologist. Should you sort of acknowledge this? Should you talk to it? Should you pretend it's not there and just try to do straight anthropology? So I can add that to the list of things we can talk about maybe at the end in the discussion is the whole notion of development and how this research on mobile money might be influenced by development, or how it might be changed by that development perspective. Okay. So what I've tried to do is something pretty different. Let's see. Okay. Try to look at this more from an anthropological perspective. Rather than putting the economic at the center, I've tried to put the cultural at the center. With the use of mobile money, can we see it as a form of mobile communication itself rather than as a form of banking? And for example, the anthropologist Erin Taylor has argued that mobile money can be seen as a form of mobile communication. And I think most people in Western Kenya would agree with her. I was struck by how much more aware people were of the social relationships that they were creating and mediating and thinking about as they sent remittances, or the social meaning of that is always very important. Of course, it is money, but both of them are very interconnected and entwined with each other. So what kinds of social relationships are created and revealed by these flows of mobile money? Can it show us about changing family relationships? How does mobile communication affect traditions of kinship and friendship and social life in Western Kenya? So those are the things that I have been interested in. Let me go to the next slide. Okay. So I did a lot of my work in Western Kenya. It is a predominantly rural area. About half of the people in Western Kenya live below the poverty line in Kenya, which is about $2 a day. These statistics in this slide are from a 2005 Kenyan census, so the reality may be somewhat different from that. Traditionally, in the area, people are subsistence farmers, and what with the increase in population and the lack of access to land, people are seeking out new forms of livelihood, what is often called the multiplex livelihood. People cobble together sources of income from a variety of places, including remittances from friends and relatives, to try to put together enough resources to live and thrive. So I think we should see mobile money as an economic strategy as part of the creation of that multiplex livelihood, which includes a lot of traditional things, farming and animals, but it might include small business, remittances, and other things as well. Okay. All right, some of the uses that are remittances are put towards, and these are my own categories. Urgent needs: you will call a friend or relative if you are really in trouble. You're stranded without transport, your child has been sent home, someone is ill and needs treatment. There are also everyday and regular remittances people may send to a parent, to a spouse, out of a sort of a regular sense of obligation. And then finally, social payments at funerals and coming of age ceremonies, which are very popular in Western Kenya. And these generally draw on a really large network, community network of people who contribute to provide for those ceremonies. All right. So again, to see these in their cultural context, I was amazed how many people impressed upon me the usefulness of the remittances that came to them from friends and relatives. And usefulness is very important. In Western Kenya, children are often praised for being useful, and people were often praised for being useful through their remittances. So people give a little bit of themselves when they send remittances, and it's a way for them to stay socially relevant and socially alive. And it's not uncommon to hear people speak about a migrant as if he or she is there, especially through his remittances or her remittances. People sort of stay there. And I thought this was, oops, my earbud fell off. I thought this was a good example of that. In terms of the ceremonies, this was the focus of my field season this summer with my assistants and associates, Alex Wanyama and Gabriel Kunyu. We've been working with 36 families who participated in the coming of age ceremonies for young boys this summer. And it's a kind of an annual cycle which involves gifts and prestations at various stages. And so we're examining how mobile money fits into this entire cycle, some of it very ritualized and some of it not. And we're kind of right in the middle of things because the ceremonies happen in August, and then everything will end with a passing out in December when there will be another round of gifts. So we're kind of looking at how mobile money fits into and gets integrated into a variety of contexts, social, even cultural and ceremonial as well. And I guess in my work, I found sort of two insights to be really important, and they sort of guided me through a period of a lot of confusion. So I thought I'd just save you all of that and just let you know what my insights are right off the bat. The first one was that people use mobile money as members of groups. So people basically connect to other groups of people when they send and receive money. So savings groups, these have been popular for a long time. My finding was that rather than the phone somehow interfering with the face-to-face sociality that these groups are known for, it actually seemed to accentuate the cohesion of the group. It supported people who were moving around a lot, who still wanted to have savings groups, for example, bus drivers and matatu drivers who like to pool part of their earnings for the day. Savings groups can be based on friendship, on neighborhood, on similar profession, on common interests. And I found that the phone is very much a part of all of these groups. Many NGOs have also worked with women's groups and recommended certain practices like saving your weekly or monthly contribution on your phone, connecting to an equity bank account, and so on. So through the savings groups, the financial inclusion behaviors also seem to be becoming important for people. It's also very common for siblings and other close relatives to send and receive money to each other and also to pool money for specific purposes. It's often the oldest son who will sort of take the lead on rounding up his other siblings, especially in times of crisis. For example, a parent is in need of medical help or school fees, or someone needs to build a house for a parent in order to honor them. This pooling behavior really seems to have taken off. And I think a large part of that is because of the phone. It gives people a way of immediately connecting and creating that social group. So that brings me to the second insight that I discovered, which is that the mobile phone itself has this duality to it, which is kind of oxymoronic and hard to tease out, especially when you're in the field. But and I just have a quote here from Rich Ling, whose work has really helped me understand all this. But as he says, the mobile phone allows a very direct and indeed a very individualized medium through which I can maintain my social networks. So on the one hand, the mobile phone creates connection. It's a device that creates social relationships amongst a group of people. On the other hand, though, it gives the individual the ability to shape those networks and to participate in those networks that the individual chooses to participate in. So on the one hand, it's this device that creates social life and creates groups. On the other hand, it heightens the ability, the agency of the individual to modulate his or her participation in those groups. So this kind of duality between the connected group and the individual, sort of networked individualism, it's very salient in a culture like Western Kenya, where there's not a lot of cultural space for individualism to begin with. And so the phone can be really powerful, but also quite disruptive of existing social relationships as well. So it's a device where you create connections, but you can also, by so doing, you can sever connections. And I think anyone who's been on the outside of an intense mobile phone conversation, has felt that feeling of exclusion that you can get from the mobile phone, the nature of social relationships created by the mobile phone. So let me talk a little bit about the first one first, the idea of creating groups, and just to give some examples of how the mobile money groups sort of create themselves and what they look like. So I've used social network analysis here. Again, many thanks to Yang at University of Notre Dame, Elizabeth Gross at San Jose State University, who's also helped me with some of the mysteries of social network analysis. This is really kindergarten social network analysis for the people who do the real math. But anyway, this is complicated enough for me. Okay. So in this case, Sarah, I met Sarah walking down the road one day outside Kimilili. She is a Marigoli woman. She's 36. Her mother is no longer living, was the third wife of a polygynous man. At his death, the other wives chased Sarah and her mother and her older sister Joyce away from the compound. So they were forced to find another place to live. Joyce found employment as a secretary and eventually met an agricultural scientist from Holland. So she moved to Holland, and now she sends Sarah about $200 or $300 each month. That's about 10 times the size of the average domestic remittance amongst the people that I worked with. So Sarah uses that money for a variety of purposes. Cecilia is her friend and fellow seamstress, and she says Cecilia is like a sister to me, so she sends money to Cecilia. She sends money to her sister Joan, her brother Aquio, her mother's brother Harrison, her brother Jack, and Joan's daughter Flora. So you can see that the initial remittance comes from Joan, and then it begins to circulate in Sarah's network according to how Sarah would like to use the money and send the money. The other thing about this graph is that the size of the circle indicates the centrality of the node. In other words, the centrality means how many connections does this node have and how important is it in overall shaping the network. So Joan's daughter Flora is actually the largest node, the most central node. So she's getting remittances from 5 different people and eventually, not all this money, but much of it probably can be sourced to Joyce, who lives in Holland. So it's interesting on many levels. On one hand, it's kind of like a kinship diagram in a lot of ways. You see the importance of sibling relationships. And of course, sibling relationships are very important in East African kinship, and the theory on that goes back to Radcliffe Brown and probably even earlier. You can also see that my sibling's daughter is also important to me and like a daughter to me. So for Sarah, showing love to her daughter means also showing love to her niece. So these are the different sorts of relationships and things that you can look at when you draw the social networks here. Okay, here's another one. Here I have used very dark outlines to denote generational differences. So the dark outline, the thickest outline would be the oldest generation, then the next generation is slightly dark, and then the third generation is very has a very light border. So Mary is the third wife of a polygynous man. She is connected to her two brothers, Shibika and Saisi, a friend of hers, Stella, and the green, everyone in green is her child. So she has children, Stephen, Johnny, Job, Betty, and so on. All the green medium thickness border are her children. Beryl, Faith, and Charity are her grandchildren, and Susanna and Grace are her daughters-in-law. So this is a common pattern, and in many ways it's similar to the next one I'm going to show you, where another woman who is married to a polygynous man relies a lot on her brothers. In this case, another Mary relies on Joseph and Oduor. Those are her brothers. Her uncle, Brian, Brian's children, Esther and Ochieng, and then all of her children are in green there. So notice that her husband, she didn't really name him as one of her mobile money partners, and that was a kind of a common pattern. So I have many of these. I'm not going to show you too many of them, but the idea is to just connect the ethnographic information on the family and who earns money and how people are related to each other and where people live to the networks that are created by these flows of mobile money. So here are 6 siblings: David, Bernard, Fred, Nangela, Rose, and George. Everyone who is in a color on this graph is a child of one of those siblings. And notice that they don't just send money to their own children, but they send money to their nieces and nephews. So around a core of siblings, these networks then move to connecting the children of siblings. And people often send money to their siblings' children just as often or more often than they send money to their own children, which I found was pretty interesting. So basically we have networks of siblings that become networks of cousins in the next generation. And it's interesting that there is no word for cousin in most Kenyan languages, being a lineage-based system. And indeed, the mobile money networks seem to show that in many networks, there are more cousin ties than there are sibling ties, which I found kind of interesting. So you can kind of read these almost like a kinship diagram. So to summarize, rather than to show a lot of graphs, these networks are based around siblings. The central individuals, so big nodes with a lot of connections that really shape the picture of the entire network. They can be old or young individuals, they can be male or female. The networks seem to be focused, however, on ties to mothers. That's not always true, but it is sometimes true. I have about 14 families now, and I think it's just a question of building a good sample size on these as well. And sometimes finding everybody in the network can be pretty time-consuming too. The networks are characterized by reciprocity and density, and I'm going to show you a little bit what that looks like. Here's just a bunch of numbers, but in the networks that I have a big enough sample size for, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the networks are reciprocal. And what that means is that senders are also receivers. There's reciprocity in the flows of mobile money. And I'm just going to go back really quickly to something like this. If you look at the arrows, you can see that if someone is just a recipient, then that arrow will just have one arrowhead on it. But if it's a reciprocal relationship, there'll be arrowheads on either side of the line. So essentially, by far, most of the relationships in these networks are reciprocal. Where you will see unidirectional flows of money often tends to be with an international migrant or someone who works in an urban center, especially Nairobi, who tends to only send and might receive in some other way, right? Maybe when he goes home, he gets a basket of maize or something from the farm from one of the relatives who he has sent money to. But in terms of the mobile money, he might only be, or she might only be, a sender. But most people are both senders and receivers. Another thing that's interesting about these networks is not just the reciprocity, but what is termed the density of the network. So the density can be seen in this statistic here, average degree, which means how many connections does the average node have? And you can see of all the families in this particular table, the average degree is 5.53. So what that means is that the average person has 5.5 people that he or she sends and receives mobile money from on a regular basis. Reciprocity and density are features that essentially operate to spread the resource evenly in the network. What that means is that it gives every individual node more opportunities to receive the resources that are flowing in the network. And I think it's really interesting that these networks show that feature. And I think it can be related to the cultural patterns and beliefs that are behind the creation of this particular kind of social relationship. Reciprocity has been the way that East African people have made it through life and survived and thrived for a long, long time. Parker Shipton has referred to this as the culture of entrustment. An earlier idea of Goran Haydn, the economy of affection. All these ideas sort of describe the same thing, which is this web of kin support. And it's interesting and maybe a little ironic that this brand new technology has been employed not necessarily to do new things, but to help people do the kinds of things that they've always been doing. So it's kind of an interesting irony in terms of the kinds of social networks that people are creating with mobile money. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the brokerage pattern that we find with grandmothers. Brokerage is not very common in these networks, again, simply because they are dense and they tend to create a lot of connections amongst the nodes. But brokerage is when you have one person who connects the resources of one group with another group here. So this is a grandmother in Naitiri village. She's in her early 70s and she has 8 children and 44 grandchildren. She has 2 children who live in Chicago, a boy and a girl here. And you can see that the woman sends remittances to a lot of people and more than the man does. And I think that is an interesting pattern that should be looked at more in terms of international remittances and the culture of international remittances. This daughter, just like the daughter in the first slide, sends a lot more money than the average Kenyan sends in-house. She also sends several $100s a month to her relatives. And it all goes into this sort of circulating pool of resources. Now, what the grandmother does is she sends money to her dead sister's oldest daughter, who circulates it among her brothers and sisters and the children of her brothers and sisters in yellow here. So that's an example of brokerage. In the sort of sociological tradition in the West, brokerage is considered to be a position of advantage or of social capital because it's supposed to give you control over how resources get moved from one area of an organization, say, or a network to another. I think in this culture of reciprocity and connection, it might not be such a good position. For example, this grandmother is very, very often asked for funds from other people in her village, in her extended family, and people tend to know when she's received a remittance, and so they will come and ask for help and so on. So she has a hard time keeping her money, and she does not have a bank account and says she doesn't really have enough money to put in a bank account, even though, again, her daughter is being a very good daughter by sending her money really on a monthly basis. So I think it's an interesting comment on some of the features of reciprocity and how they influence individual behavior. Okay. All right, so I think it's important to go back to those networks and look at who is missing, because as I said at the beginning, these networks shaped by mobile communication, they are instruments of inclusion, but also instruments of exclusion. And going back to Richard Link's comment again, a very individualized medium to shape and to maintain social networks. So this idea of mobile money as very disruptive is very, very strong idea in Western Kenya. As one lady said, this service should just be for women because it's really destroying marriages around here. We also met a really interesting married couple this summer who they used to have 2 phones, but they got rid of one phone, and now they just use one phone together, which is under the wife's, registered under the wife, but they felt that the phone was a threat to their marriage. So I just think, again, highlighting that individualism in a culture where the marriage tie is perhaps not the strongest, historically at least, because of polygynous marriage and many other factors. I thought that was kind of an interesting commentary and a way of shaping a device that is meant for individuals to be shared by 2 people. Other people that are often cut off are in-laws and people who are not related by blood. So many people use the phone to send money to their brothers and sisters without their husband or wife discovering or finding out. And that seemed to be something that was very, very important to people, to maintain that connection, again, to that group of siblings. But sometimes it clashes with the in-laws and the spouse, who, as you notice, I did the spouses on those network graphs. I then did them in white without any color, and you sort of saw that there really aren't very many in-laws on most of those, most of the graphs. Fathers, again, not always absent, but very often absent, especially in polygynous relationships, which are still quite common in Western Kenya. It's very hard, I think, to really do a polygynous father right in this day and age. And most people who are in their 20s and 30s don't have a lot of positive memories of growing up in polygynous households, and they feel quite conflicted about sending money to fathers. That was something we saw often. So that tension between the individual ability to control and shape, to include, to exclude, is very much sitting in tension with those traditions of reciprocity, that economy of affection, that culture of entrustment that really creates communities that are equal and egalitarian and share and are characterized by trust. So on the one hand, the networks show those characteristics, but there are many people who are not in the network when you ask people about their networks. So that tension is there, but I think many people have been able to use the technology to their advantage and to moderate or shape their participation in networks in ways that they feel are satisfying to the different competing interests in their social life. This is an example from an urban migrant. He's talking about this circumcision ceremony. He didn't want to attend because he knew he would be hit up for so many requests when he traveled to the rural areas, so he turned off his phone. So turning off your phone is kind of the light way of stopping a connection. It's a temporary way of interrupting a connection. If you really want to cut people off, you change your SIM card. And we talked to one man who was planning his son's circumcision and was deeply, deeply hurt when his older brother not only turned off his phone, but basically got a new SIM card. So he didn't just get the message that says, you know, the mteja message, as they call it, that says, you know, this customer is not available, but he said, you know, this line is no longer in service. And then he knew that that relationship was over. And so that was very hurtful to him. In this case, he kind of turned off his phone, which is, again, sort of a temporary way of doing this. He turned off his phone for the big ceremony, but then he made the call to his sister-in-law a few days before this more minor ceremony that happens in December that I mentioned that kind of seals the deal and confirms that the boy is now a man. He said, I asked her to prepare a shopping list of everything that would be needed for the meal. She sent me an SMS with the list that came to 6,000 shillings. And I sent her that. There was a big feast, and the 6,000 paid for everything, and then my brother called me to say thank you. So he feels, at least, that he's been able to have it, you know, both ways. He's still participating in the social network at home, because after all, with this multiplex livelihood, you don't really know what's going to happen. Your next business venture will probably fail, and you're probably going to need your relatives back at home sooner or later. On the other hand, he had the choice to participate or not participate by turning off his phone. So I think this might have something to do with the real popularity of the M-Pesa service, because again, shaping your own social network, turning on, turning off, as you see fit. I think the other side of this, though, is what did the brother really think? It's interesting that he called his sister-in-law and not his brother, and that says something about the level of comfort he felt in reintroducing himself into the social network after turning off his phone for his nephew's ceremony. And really in this culture it would be like a son to him because it's his brother. So really his brother's son is basically his son. So maybe he should have done more. So those are the kinds of ambivalences I think that are created with this new form of social relationships. And as these social networks of mobile money become more and more important, I think social life will definitely change in Kenya. We'll have new kinds of relationships that are mediated by the mobile phone. I think it's really a fascinating topic. It's something that I connect to personally very much, and I think we all probably do because most of us have these new phones right now, and they are changing our lives so quickly we are not even aware of it ourselves. So it's amazing to go to another culture and see a mirror image of what you may be going through in a completely different cultural context. So that's really all I have. I'd like to turn it over for questions if I can.
Questions can be asked either in the chat menu or the Q&A section.
Okay.
And just to start off, I was curious, and since I'm the moderator, I guess I get first dibs on questions. If you could elaborate a little more on the gender divide in international relations, I guess. You had mentioned them briefly, but.
Oh, I think that a lot of research has shown that women tend to send more remittances than men. I don't have any data on that myself, but it's something I'd love to look into. So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Let's see, what else do we got here? And I guess people aren't coming in with questions. Actually, so along those lines, I had meant to say this at the beginning, but we had wanted to show a YouTube video. It just, technology didn't work out. So I'm actually going to post this video for all you attendees to view afterwards in the chat menu. So you'll see it there. Oh, I'm sorry. People had asked a question. So I know the current Ebola crisis is not currently affecting Kenya at all, or maybe not directly affecting it, I should say. But do you find that this crisis is affecting the mobile economy at all?
I don't know. I think that's an interesting question. I hadn't thought of that. I know that the diaspora community from Sierra Leone and Liberia is quite involved in helping with the crisis. Again, I'm not an expert on that, but I learned that in last week's webinar, I guess. So, you know, these global connections are very important. But I don't know of it directly affecting the situation in Kenya, since I don't think anyone has who is infected has arrived there. I know they're probably screening people, and I'm sure they're concerned about it. My guess is they're probably screening people at Nairobi airport. But that's all I know.
Yeah, no. It doesn't look like you were very thorough. It seems as though there are no further questions to ask. And so with that, I think we can wrap up, unless there's anything you would further like to bring up.
No, thank you, and thanks for everyone who attended. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so just as some housekeeping notes, we will be doing this in 2 weeks' time on November 5th with Samuel Collin. He will be discussing the mysteries of big data, which I'm sure will be good. And again, thank you very much, Sibel, for joining us and enlightening us on mobile economies. The video will be up. Oh, shoot. I do see that, wait, there is one question. I'm sorry. People are throwing in questions now. So Pam McClendon has a question, which is, based on networking, is the one providing the money the most valued person?
Oh, that's a good question. Not necessarily, no. The one providing money is rarely the central node, and I think that's what's interesting. The central node tends to be somebody else, but that central node also has, that particular person not only has a lot of connections, but that particular person is always very reciprocal too. So that particular person has a big role in shaping the network, but more as a conduit for those resources, I guess. So it's an interesting point. And most of the time, if there is an external migrant who is sending the money, they have very little to do with the shape of the network. And there seem to be two different mindsets about sending money home, and I did some of this work with Kenyan migrants in Chicago. Some of them would send money to one individual person, such as their mother, and they sort of let their mother be the broker and send money to others and judge whose requests or needs were most important. Others wanted to really make the decision and send money directly to different kinds of people, so they would often have many connections, and you saw that in the network that I showed. So I just think that's an interesting way of looking at it. One other feature of these networks, again, because they're very dense and they're basically aimed at distributing the money evenly, is that people know a lot about who is sending money to who, which is pretty interesting. And that fits in with the network theory, because a very dense network is usually associated with a lot of trust and openness and information sharing. So people know a lot about who is sending money to who. We interviewed a grandchild who is widely considered to be the favorite grandchild. And she said, you know, people think that grandmother sends a lot of money to me, but she really doesn't. So when they ask me how much money she sent, and I say 250 shillings, they say, oh, that you must be lying. She must have sent more money than that. So again, there's such a close connection people make between the emotion behind the remittance and the value itself. I find that really interesting. In other words, none of her other cousins believed that her grandmother only sent her 250 shillings because she was sort of the favorite child. She must have gotten more than that. So it's interesting. Again, it's that tension between the privacy and the sort of communitas, the relationship of the group at play there.
Yeah, no, great question. We actually, since we do have some time, we have 2 more questions, and I think that'll be good. So Miri Nalini, excuse my pronunciation, says that you have spoken about how these new financial services and technologies are changing the nature of social relationships in Kenya, and your argument echoes a lot of what Sibel argued about the nature of money. It is both individual and social, inclusive and exclusive, and that is what makes money special. I was wondering if you think these technologies are changing the nature of money itself.
Oh, that's such a great question. I wish I could answer that better, but I think that that's a great question. And I think that old idea that money is this, abstract and divisible and Western, sort of non-cultural, non-symbolic form of money that sort of takes over in places where value is more social and more cultural. I think we can definitely throw that out, because I think in mobile money what people do is in that connection between the effective bond and the money is so close. Like in the example that I just gave of the granddaughter who couldn't possibly be receiving such small remittances from someone who loves her so much. So I think it's a good example of how, these new and ever more immaterial forms of money are just as culturally and socially imbued as ever. But I think that's a great question, and I would love to investigate that further. So send me your ideas.
Yeah, no, great question. And so we have time for one more, I think. And this one comes from Daniela. In your research, did you deal with any microfinance groups? And was reciprocity and exchanges of money through mobile banking present, or most relationships family-based?
And thank you for asking that. The networks I just showed are just from the work with the families. But one of our team, Harpith Chagar, has done a lot of work with savings groups, and she has like 60 savings groups. So I didn't even talk about that yet. But absolutely, the savings groups use the phone, and there's a whole gamut in this group. In other words, there are groups that have been operating face-to-face for a long time, and they might use, for those individuals, they might use the phone to send their contribution for the week if they can't be there. Occasionally, they will use the phone to bring together the contributions and send them to the bank. That's very common. A lot of the banks now have special accounts for chamas or savings groups. And the savings groups have just taken off in Kenya, and the sort of very gendered view of them in the past that they were just for women, that has really changed. And I think it's because of the mobile phone. A lot of men are forming savings groups, and a lot of people who work in the same job who are of both genders are forming savings groups at their places of employment. And in fact, many of these people were afraid to give us information because they didn't want their bosses to find out. One place where I think it's really, really common is the transportation industry and the matatus, where there's a lot of under-the-table movement of money around the kind of crew of people who operate a matatu. And also in the transportation industry is another area where people almost exclusively operate savings groups off of their phones. Harpieth, or Pinky as she likes to be called, found a few cases of that. So the individuals are rarely in the same place at the same time, but they use the phone to contribute a certain amount of money, usually at the end of every week, and then one individual takes all of that at a certain time, and it kind of goes in that cycle. University students will get together and they will do an entirely mobile phone-based pooling scheme, and there's no meetings and all the other things that are associated with the earlier model of the savings group. So I think this is a huge topic, a really fascinating topic, and I think it fits what we know of, or the theories about mobile communication and the way you can create a kind of fleeting and yet very intimate group using the mobile phone. And I think a lot of these savings groups have those features. So I think that's definitely worthy of more study. So yes, I think that the mobile phone is not only important to savings groups, but is changing the nature of the savings groups. And I think it's simply because with the mobile phone, you can sort of bring together a small group of intimates right away. If you think about it, the family networks where I showed all these groups of siblings, in a way it's almost like transitioning into a savings group, because the next stage is that the siblings will all contribute when, say, you know, dad would like us to build him a house or something like that. It almost like fills the gap, and it kind of operates on the same sort of idea. So I think it's that culture of reciprocity married with mobile phone sociality. And in a way, these sibling groups, these family groups, and these savings groups are almost like two versions of the same model in a way. So I didn't have time to talk about those, but.
Yeah, no, you were very thorough. So thank you everyone. I think now I jumped the gun a little bit, so I apologize for that. But thank you all for your questions, and thank you, Sibel, for coming and talking to us today. She did leave her email address, so I'm assuming if you have any further questions or would like to follow up on this webinar, you're welcome to send your questions to Kusimba@american.edu, or, of course, the AAA, which I guess would be conferences@aaanet.org. Both are good. And again, 2 weeks from now, Samuel Collin will be speaking on big data, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you, Sibel, again.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I just need to end it.